Today, welcome back to another stream of this video discussion between me and my friend Austin. We are going to discuss a film called Big Fish today. It is a film directed by Tim Burton. He is pretty well known for some of his films, such as Edward Scissorhands and Nightmare Before Christmas, although he didn't direct Nightmare Before Christmas, apparently. From a little fun fact that Austin and I found out from last week, he produced it and was the executive story writer, the writer for the film, but did not technically direct it, although it is known to be his, which is pretty interesting fact. One of the few films where he is not known, even though he's not the director. He's known for the movie, even though he's not the director. I'm blanking on who the lead is. I forget his name, but he's
Ewan
pretty
McGregor.
Ian McGregor, that's right.
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Obi-Wan Kenobi, that's right. He is the main character in this film, or yes, he plays the main character in this film, and yeah. As a at least I'll discuss a bit about how I felt, and then I can give it to you, Austin. But I guess since this is my first Tim Burton film that I've seen, his style is very whimsical, almost exaggerated in a sense. There's a lot of like it's a live action film, but there's parts where they add a bit of animation in there, and it's very much like surreal or like what's it called, like over the top in a way, but it's still like, I mean, this film I think fits that sort of execution because it's all about essentially it's about the relationship between a son and his father. And the father is known for telling these exaggerated stories, but people love them, but the son is kind of like turned off by them because he thinks that since they're exaggerated, there's not truth. It's not fully true. He wants the truth from to know more about his dad, but his dad is giving him these really exaggerated stories that that don't really seem believable. And so there's this conflict essentially between the son and the father because they have a falling out in a sense, because there's these he wants the truth and the son wants the truth and the father wants to tell these glamorous yet exaggerated stories.
A little flavor.
A little bit of flavor
as he puts
at the expense of truth. So they have a falling out, and then of course the dad, and then spoilers. Anyway, this is your warning. Spoilers. The dad develops cancer, and then the son goes back to see him before when his dad's dying, and essentially the whole film is about reconciliation, about reconnecting over the time that they've lost because of their falling out. So for me, I really like the film. I really like the aspect of reconciliation between family members. I like that theme, at least, because I think, at least in terms of relationships, the ones that get me the most emotionally are those that involve family.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate this film in terms of it's like, it can be very relatable in the sense that if you've ever been frustrated with your parents, or you had a falling out of sorts, but then in the future you come back and you can reconcile, then this film is very I guess relatable in that sense. And maybe even any type of relationship. It doesn't have to be a family relationship, but any sort of relationship where you have a falling out and you come back and you reconcile. This film would really harken to those to that experience in general. But yeah, Austin, I've been talking a lot. Do you have anything to say about this film in terms of overall feelings?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of a weird film, kind of a weird movie. A lot of, cuts into, the past and fantastical stories.
Yeah.
But, it's definitely, it dwells into, as you said, the relationships between, the son and the father, but also just, how the father, it's just a story of the father's life, right? And through the stories that he tells. And we get to see, and experience what the son would have, heard and whatnot. And then also different viewpoints and different stories, and everything has all this kind of fantastical elements, right, to it.
Yep.
which is interesting. Just the way that it went through it. But I think yeah, as it goes on, the family reconciliation, especially at the end, as you saw, um, you know, it really tied it together. But it's definitely a different film. It kind of was weird to me at first, just to see how the son kind of was turned off just because of his the father's story, and that is what kind of broke them, drove them apart.
Yeah.
And then even throughout the film, it was just like cuts throughout different stories without any kind of lead into it as well. But overall, not a too terrible experience. And the cinematography also, some of the shots that we saw was worked really well, and I think framed a lot of the movie, and in a way that's visually pleasing. But yeah, overall, um, you know not a bad film. It was an enjoyable watch. So
Yeah, I agree. Definitely an enjoyable watch. There's like, yeah, I think the plot itself is pretty straightforward. Like, there's not really anything like convoluted about like understanding what was going on in the film. It was just more so. I guess the most confusing part. I mean, like you mentioned, there are a lot of cuts back and forth between the present and the past. And for the most part, they were. I think they made sense from like at least from a story's progression, and it was pretty obvious like what was present and what was past because like, um, like the father was played by two different actors, so like one of them was old and one of them wasn't.
yeah,
And Ian McGregor was the a young one, the
yeah, his
past.
past and
So
the statistical story. Yeah,
yeah, so um, yeah, it felt yeah. So like I guess whenever we went to the past, it always felt like it was very fairy tale ish. Like it was very like fantasy like in a sense.
yeah,
And I think that's like where the aspect of the storytelling comes into place, where like maybe we're trying to see we're seeing what um, basically we're kind of almost in a sense living through what like the stories that he's telling his whoever's listening to in the
yeah,
present day. Um, and you can kind of see like I can understand like I think it gives you the impression of like maybe why the son is kind of frustrated because like these stories like if someone were to describe these stories to me like and they were trying to like and I wanted to get to like know them better like I feel like I wouldn't really get to know them like the only part I would get to know them more about them is that they like to tell these exaggerated stories right I like there's not a lot like there's a lot of hidden truth or there's not a lot of maybe there's a lot of truth that's hidden um,
right.
there's like almost like a facade of sorts that's in place between the story and the storyteller and like yeah I can like in a way kind of sympathize with the son in terms of like why he's upset is that like okay like at a dinner party someone like as a friend and acquaintance sure like I don't live with this guy like having a good time telling a good story that's perfect that's fine but like as someone who's like you know um, living with his dad and like growing up with his dad I can like and he kind of like genuinely wants to know more about his dad maybe it's a
Yeah,
put off by the fact that like the more he tries to get to know him the less he ends up knowing because these stories put on like a facade um, like a barrier
right.
and yeah like that's it is yeah it's and I think his son is like a journalist of sorts like he
Yeah,
tells stories but they're like true stories like apparently
factual, right.
factual right
To the point.
to the point
Yeah,
and I think that adds a bit of tension because they're two different sides of like a spectrum in terms of storytelling um, and I wish so the film mentioned that he was like a journalist like maybe there was like one scene where he was at work and he got a call or something
but yeah,
and he
he
goes
was in France, Paris, right? And I think he works for like the AP division, like the
the AP
Associated
division
Press there. I
oh
think,
okay
yeah. And in France, he
yeah
was, the first call he gets is like, oh yeah. But yeah, I think it revealed that early in the film,
yep
and then he gets the call. Yeah,
yeah and so I mean the whole film is about like him getting to know his dad more through his stories or like basically like living through like his dad's stories but Yeah.
And in a way that's how we get to know him, right? We get to see the father, Edward Bloom, go through his life and different points in his life,
Yeah.
in a fantastical way, and as I think the wife said, like these tall tales, right?
Mhm.
um, and it's interesting, right? I mean, sometimes it just cuts kind of randomly into it. Sometimes like we get led into why what this story will be telling. um, but it's definitely an interesting way to just know who this guy is, this kind of larger than life character, right?
Mhm.
And in a way, it's like all this like mythical um, storytelling, which kind of surrounds this character and kind of like, oh, like was it real, was it not? We all know, we know it's not real, but it's just like it's kind of like a larger than life thing, like oh, this like kind of extreme, and as I think you touched on before, it's just like different, and the way that this man has lived his life, with all these like flourishes and whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's definitely interesting because some of the fantastic elements. It's like, oh, like it's really kind of wild and a bit weird, and I think that kind of fits with Tim Burton style, right?
Yep.
Um, you know, we have like giants and we have like witches, beginning the story of
And
life.
apparently, we have werewolves.
Yeah, werewolves, all
Dan
these
DeVito plays a
different.
werewolf, which is pretty
Yeah,
interesting.
so it's definitely very very, very interesting. Like I think I think the themes of like well, I don't know about theme, but like his love for his wife, his one true love, right? He kind of
Yeah.
sets out like, oh, how is he's dedicated to her, and what he will do for to get to know who she is, right, by working through the carnival,
Mhm.
and then what he would do, try to get her to win her love, to um, you know win her away from the bully, which that guy always played second fiddle, like throughout the life, right? You see all these times he's lost, and now he's also lost his the fiance
Yeah.
to Edward Bloom. But
Yeah.
yeah, just to see how how I think maybe his life wasn't as um, uh, it's either his life maybe wasn't as exciting, so he puts all these flourishes to it, or
Yeah.
maybe his life is also kind of like was also kind of like also like interesting and wild, but he also adds this fantastical element to it just to make it
Mhm.
maybe not seem as like crazy or stressful, right?
Yeah.
Like just like how he went through the Korean drafted into the Korean War.
Yep.
He kind of crafted a story where he instead of being captured, he had see these two Siamese twins, and they made an escape, a
Mhm.
wild escape before coming back home.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, also the same thing with how he um, going near the beginning of the movie, how he left home, right? That could be a stressful experience, and he's going through the darker path, right? Maybe telling this fantastical story is a way not to make it seem as dark and dreary, but just make it seem more like, oh, there's these trials and tribulations, of like a regular quest, right? Instead of like something that he was scared to do, and of the unknown and
Right.
whatnot.
Yeah. Like that. I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. I think his life, um, Edward Bloom's life, who is the father, I think his life was like interesting enough to put a spin on it, to add an extra flair to it, to make it even like more fantastic than it was. I think there was already like some element of like interest, basically. Like he lived a pretty interesting life. Um,
Yeah.
he went like, and I think there was already that like substance that was there that he could build on to make it even more like fitting for a great story, or a story that he like wanted to tell. So like, and I think I think that the theme is pretty much explored to the point where like, oh, like, would you rather know the truth, the boring truth, or would you rather know like an exaggerated like an exaggerated lie that makes it more entertaining, right? Like there's an entertainment value to this, like listening to the story and sort of like, you know, appreciating like what was going on through his life. And like, I think the ending of the film sort of explores that theme almost. Um, when the son is finishing his dad's story, before the dad passes away, of course. And then he realizes that like I think at this moment when he finishes the dad's story, he kind of realizes why his dad tells these exaggerated these basically tells these exaggerations because they're more interesting, and in a
Yeah,
sense they build a stronger community almost, because they can all talk, like everyone he's ever encountered or affected, or like he's had some sort of relationship with, they all came back for his funeral and they were all able to like reminisce about Edward Bloom and his
yeah,
stories.
that's true. Yeah, it brought people
um
together, a common connector, right?
that common
Between all
connector,
these
exactly.
that people can recall and retell, right?
Hmm.
That's true.
Yeah. And so I think at that point the son, I think it's very interesting because like it's like one of those things where like, I mean, the climax of the film is I feel like is essentially like when the dad gets a stroke, gets sent to the hospital, and then there he needs his son needs to finish his dad's story. I think that's kind of like my impression, what I remember like to be the climax, and then it's a very quick fall off. Like there's not a lot of time between that and like the ending of the film, but I think after the story is finished and after like during that funeral, I think the son truly reconnects with his dad,
Yeah.
and understands why he does what he does in terms of his stories.
Yeah.
Um, and
Well, I think it kind of starts with after he talks to the doctor, right? The doctor kind of reveals like about the the circumstance of the son's birth. Like, oh, the father wasn't there. It
oh
was
yeah,
perfectly great birth. Like nothing really it was kind of boring and nothing terrible happened.
mm-hmm.
And the doctor says between the true story and this the one that your father tells, I prefer the one that his father tells. And I think that's when it kind of clicks for him. Like, oh, life may have been ordinary, you know,
Yeah,
but he was able to tell these stories. And I think it goes into what you're saying, right? Because of these stories, people are attracted to Edward Bloom, are able to recall these stories and able to share them and laugh with him.
yeah,
And then, as you say, it kind of becomes a common connector. But yeah, as you said, it's probably near the end of the film when he finally reconnects and understands and reconciles the fact that what these stories are about and why his father tells them.
mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Um, there were a couple of scenes I remember watching like where I thought like I could have like it was presented one way, but I totally could have seen it going another way. Like for instance, when the first time when in the past when Edward Bloom goes into Spectre. Now Spectre is a town that's kind of like out,
Oh yeah.
isolated from like kind of like the rest of society. It has this very
Mm.
like old, like 1940s commercial vibe where like this is the ideal
Yeah.
suburb, and this is where like this is the American dream at the time, where like everyone's like living in this close knit community and everything's dainty and good and like whatnot. But I remember like when he was gone to the scene and like people all just started coming out at the same time. I was like, this is like the beginning of a horror film. This is straight up like a beginning of like is this guy going to be able to leave Spectre, and how is he going to be able to leave Spectre? Because I can totally see a story with that. Like I can totally see him like having to like he's imprisoned without like the girl took his shoes and like put him off, and I was like, oh my god, that's the beginning of the end. Uh, but he's gonna get brainwashed and whatever. But like he manages to escape. But it didn't turn out to be like that. It was just like I gotta go because I have
He needs to.
this town ain't big enough for me, you know.
Yeah, he needs
Um,
to. He doesn't want to live in comfort just yet. He wants to be
right.
able to, go into all the other trials and tribulations that he has to, um, and we're not yet ready to settle down.
Right.
Which Spectre would be the perfect town too.
Right.
Um, when they got to that town, I actually thought that was kind of an allusion to death, that he died, like going through the path. Because he's like, there was that talk with that poet,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who was that played by?
He was played by
Steve Buscemi, right?
Buscemi. Yeah, Steve Buscemi.
So he goes to sees the poet. I thought the poet was like someone who lived a long time and was dead, and then he met somehow. I thought it was like kind of like heaven because this place was perfect, right? And he's like, oh, your
Oh.
time is early. Your time is early. It's not yet. But I thought he might have died, and then when he leaves town, that's when he comes back because it was kind of weird. Just this perfect kind of like place that's like heaven.
Mm-hmm.
it's not until later in the movie I was like, oh, I guess this is the actual town that he goes to,
Yeah.
right? It's just fantastical tale of a perfect place that he tries to save. But the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, I guess did this guy die? You come back to life, or like near death experience. And now he comes back to like after traveling onto the dangerous path, because like right before, right, we have a warning of like dangerous jumping spiders, which kind of creeped me out because I don't like spiders.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought something happened, and now he's in this perfect place. Met the poet who no one's seen for years.
Mm-hmm.
But no, like it's actual location that he went to. It's just there's that fantastical spin, and that kind of threw me off on a loop for a while. But that's what I thought at first. But
Yeah,
it's not. It's not death. It's just a place that he did not want to settle down yet. It was just a perfect place he could like retire to, but obviously he didn't, and he came back to that place later, to try to save the town because he thought it was a great town, but that he saw it decaying.
but then like if he did, but like if okay, let's say he did die in that scene, like, but he's still alive in the present day, so like how would he be able to come back?
Well, not death, but like near death, right? So maybe something happened
so, like,
when he goes into that forest, right?
So you think it's
something
like a dream,
happened,
like a almost
right?
like
Exactly.
okay,
Yeah,
I see.
right. So he goes, and then he goes to Spectre, right? Which is in
Yeah.
this perfect place, like heaven. Everything's perfect. You don't need shoes. Everyone loves each other. Everyone dances, right?
You don't need shoes.
The wind is great. The temperature is great. You see the other poet that no one has seen for years. Everyone doesn't know what happened, right? Because they said once you step in here, you never come out, right? So I thought, like, oh, this guy either died or is, again, you're having a hallucination because he went through the forest and something happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's able to leave and come back, and now he's back into life, back to go back and do what he's ready to do, or what he's meant to do. A big fish in a small pond, kind of thing. Fulfill his ambition. But at that point, I thought, maybe he might have lost his way or is willing to, settle down and, give everything up. But no, this is one trial that he was able to pass and, continue on his way, onto the journey with the big giant. But that's what I thought at first, like what this kind of whole location was. But then, obviously it was revealed that no, Spectre is a real location, right? The girl he meets, turned into, an older lady who he tried to help, and he tried to help the town as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that this place, instead of maybe representing, and maybe it does represent kind of maybe it's an allusion to that, like a perfect place, like a heaven, whatnot, but also it becomes an illusion of being a great place to settle down where you're comfortable and don't need to move on in life, right? We saw the poet kind of stuck on his own poetry and whatnot. So this is a way where you stop all ambition and you just settle down. You're comfortable with what is right now instead of going what you can be.
Right, exactly.
So my interpretation at first was a little different, but I was able to understand that after seeing Spectre come back again, as well as seeing the poet kind of become a bank robber. I was like, oh, the guy left town. He's not actually
Yeah.
dead.
He's
So
not dead.
he was just there and not willing to move on. He was willingly content to be in that stay in that town and not do anything else.
There's a this is a bit of an aside, but there was a well, at the near the end of his visit in Spectre, there was a really funny scene where as he was going, it was a nighttime, the lanterns were all lit, there was a big dance in the middle of town. There was a scene where I feel like on the left side of the shot, there was an extra who was dancing in circles with two others. It was a guy dancing with like two girls in a circle, and like he stumbled. I saw him stumble. Okay, I'm gonna pull it up real quick, and I want to see if this is actually like, I don't know if you noticed, but it was like very obvious to me for whatever reason, and I thought it was freaking hilarious. And I'm not sure if this was done on purpose or if it's just like, oh, it just made the cut because it was like there's so many people in the shot already, like whatever, But I'm gonna pull it up real quick. I think it's actually like really funny. Anyway, the timestamp, if you care. This took a lot more effort than I remember. But it's 36:45. That is the timestamp for the film. If you ever want to go back and watch it, there's a dude. If you just focus your attention on the left side of the screen, he's dancing with like two ladies. There's a guy, and he like tumbles over. It's pretty funny. I thought it was pretty entertaining. I had to like rewatch it multiple times to make sure that I saw it correctly. But yeah, Anyway, that was a huge aside slash like, you know, maybe a waste of time. Anyway,
Anyway,
lost viewers over that. Oh man, it's not worth. Anyway, yeah. What are some other things that you wanted to touch up on?
um, that's true. I mean, everything was pretty fantastical, and then everything I think was kind of straightforward in terms of what we see, how his life went, and I think a lot of people kind of uh, not appease him, but they kind of like go with the stories, but it's just his son who's kind of different, right?
Mm-hmm.
The story of how he met his wife, or trying to learn about his wife, like working at the carnival, is just kind of interesting. That how he subjects himself to all this, and the torture, well, yeah, all the hard work, hard labor for like no pay, just wants information was kind of ridiculous, right? Because there's
Yeah.
no way to know, right? Because Danny DeVito's character, he kind of just tells, comes up, and I don't know if if he was
He was
himself
telling the
spouting,
truth.
yeah, telling the truth, because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, she likes daffodils. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
or
Like, what
she likes,
flower? Yeah.
yeah, or just she likes music. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Fantastic. What a useful fact.
Yeah, exactly. And then obviously, he turns into a werewolf, which is, well, I wonder what the whole, maybe that's just the werewolf is just the whole fantastical part to to let everyone know, like, oh, he's now willing to move on, and this is kind of like the catalyst, like, of why the story can continue on.
Yeah.
But still, it was kind of strange, like, oh, the werewolf and the lawyer will come down, and is willing to shoot, but Edward Broom was like, oh, that's not, he's just lonely, and yeah. But it's just again, all these kind of have fantastical elements. Some of these stories were kind of weird and strange, and some of it you kind of understand why, or you kind of wonder, like, what is the real truth behind it. I think a big maybe theme or message was about how he lived his life and how he's not afraid to go through these things and become ambitious and do what he can without being afraid, right? Like the very first scene was when he was a young kid and saw the witch and saw how he would die, right, with the glass eye.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because he's like, oh, now he knows that he will not die, right? He can now do whatever, he's not afraid, and he'll be able to have this ambition, right? And able to do whatever situation he goes in, he knows he will not die because it's not his time yet, right? Especially after he goes through all these other dangerous situations, right? It will not happen until much later because he knows how he will perish, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting, because of that. This is why he's a big fish in a small pond, because he knows he can be doing greater things, and he can pursue greater things because he's not afraid. There's no fear of failure, or he won't end because of it, because he knows later on how at this point he'll die at a much later date. And that's why I think why he's ambitious, because he can he's not afraid. He does all these things, and then at the end we kind of have a story where he, which was really, really touching, where he's like, oh, he wants his son to complete the story for him. And we see that, yeah, the son creates, this kind of, drastic story, this race, how he escapes from the hospital and, sees his whole life before him, before he's released into the river. And he reveals that he is, a big fish, right? And, and is able to, kind of fits in with his father's, perception of himself, as well as kind of what his son sees of his father, and he kind of says, yeah, this is how he goes. It makes sense because yeah, this is how this is now his father's time, and his father has done so much now, which kind of interesting that his father made that story up, but it just kind of goes to show that his father had this ambition that cannot be stopped, and or maybe there's no fear because he knows that he's meant for bigger things. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I think that was a big theme of the movie, right? Because he brings up again, this is not where I go. This is he will be able to go go through it, and until his time ends at a much later point in time.
There was a scene with the witch when they were showing the deaths of the kids in the beginning of the film.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, fun fact about the witch. The witch was played also by Jenny, who was played by Helena Bonham Carter. She also played the witch.
Oh yeah, she played two
Played both.
because yeah two I think important woman in his life, right? Like the woman, like the witch, was obviously allowed him
Mm-hmm.
to, and then played Jenny, which is the little girl that he made inspector, and then again when he tells to save the town, and he says like, oh, there's only two women, or she says there's two women in his life, his wife and everyone else, right?
Mm-hmm.
To kind of combine that role of someone, another important figure. So
Yeah. Um. But yeah. Going back to the witch scene where she was showing the kids their deaths. So there was one kid, of course, who ended up dying because he got into a fight with Bloom, and you know cardiac arrest or something on the toilet.
something
We
like
saw
that,
that. We
yeah.
saw
But
this. We
yeah,
saw
he
that
has
death.
something with star, yeah.
But then there was another kid's death where he fell off a ladder at an old age,
Yeah.
and that never happened. Like we never saw that, right? So it was
Yeah.
pretty interesting. I was like wondering why we needed to see that, but I mean, it doesn't really detract. It's just you know more premonitions. But yeah, I
Yeah.
when I saw the first guy
Just to see
die,
the ability, I think. Just to
yeah.
see the ability working. So
So when I saw the first guy die, um, which you saw like in his vision and stuff like that, I thought that we'd also see like the second kid's death, just because they showed both, and I was like, oh, maybe they'll bring it back. But yeah, the second kid's death we never saw on screen, so I was like,
yeah.
oh.
Well, he wasn't an important character. We didn't really need to,
Nor was the first
that.
one. What's the
Yeah,
point?
but the first one was kind of like the bully, right? We saw
Yeah,
and then kind of the antagonist, and we finally understand why he died. But yeah,
yeah, I guess. I mean, he didn't really need to be in the film per se. Like there is that whole his wife Sandra Templeton was engaged to someone else. That someone
yeah,
else could have been someone random, for all we like. It didn't really matter. Um, that it was the bully from his childhood. There were a couple of scenes that did showcase there were shots that were on the bully specifically when Bloom was like on his growth spurt, and he kind of was the town loved him, and then there were shots of this bully who was like in the back I'm jealous. Like what the heck? This is
yeah,
the all the attention. So yeah, that obviously meant that he was going to come out in the future. Like otherwise there was no point in showcasing framing the shot on him these various times, right? But to be fair, you didn't. Other than this obstacle to get to his wife, Sandra, they didn't really need that bullet. Didn't really need to be there, right?
I think it's just to play kind of an antagonistic force, right? Because the
Yeah.
bully kind of eggs him on to get the to see the witch, right? That's the first thing, right? So that's how he meets the witch and sees how his eye, how he his death is not here yet, and I think
Yeah.
starts this ambitious streak, right? And then the bully also is used to contrast, like, oh, this guy is really successful, right? And this is one guy who has lost everything to Edward Bloom, because Edward Bloom is able to be everything and do everything.
Right.
And I think the final stroke of it is like, oh, Edward Bloom, fell in love with a woman that he cannot have at the moment because the woman falls, or is engaged, which I don't know why she would be engaged to this other, to the bully during college. But this bully, the character is just I think it's just kind of like the final thing that Edward Bloom will take away from this guy who is kind of his like a rival in childhood. Um, you know, uh, he's always losing out to Edward Bloom. So
Yeah.
I think it's just maybe it's a way for Edward Bloom just to paint himself as this heroic, as well as someone who's better than maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the these stories are portraying Edward Bloom as this perfect guy, but maybe in actuality Edward Bloom doesn't is not as perfect, right? Maybe he didn't was the star of the football team. Maybe he wasn't the star of the basketball team. Maybe he didn't get the science fair. And maybe he's just painting this picture like, oh, he's perfect, he's good and great, and he was always competing against his bully, right? And then up until the bully becomes his romantic rival. So maybe it's another point of the fantastical story of a way to show that this guy is maybe has more prominence just because he is someone he was always competing against
Yeah.
During his childhood, and maybe he just put another spin to it.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I think I mean, I think it's helpful. I guess.
They probably could have, I think maybe I agree. Like they probably could have, if he was such a big role, he could have played more prominence. The bully could have played more prominence in this, the storytelling and in his past.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe again, Edward Bloom just didn't want to, touch upon it or go into it,
Mm-hmm.
or just, glosses over it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's like maybe intentional storytelling, like, oh, maybe he wanted to leave him out, or just do the touch points of like, you know, the contrast between him and this guy he was always living this childhood life with. So
Right. Yeah. I think. Yeah. Yeah. If he had more of like a prominent role, for instance, within the within his Bloom's childhood, or maybe like his growing up within Auburn. Wait, is it called Auburn? No, not Auburn. Auburn University. Auburn's university. What's the place called again that he grew up in?
uh,
It's,
uh, uh,
Ashtown.
somewhere in
Ashton.
Alabama.
Ashton. Ashton. Ashton.
Oh, actually, right.
Yeah. Um. Maybe it would have made a little bit more sense to keep him because I felt like he wasn't really needed per se. I mean, there were like a couple of cuts of shots of him panning toward him being jealous, but other than that, it wasn't like didn't really take on like in my mind a very serious role or even a role worth like expanding on or not necessarily expanding on. Like it is a worth. I think it's a role worth expanding on, but in the time in the amount of screen time that he had, it didn't really like didn't feel like he was that important at all. Like he could
Yeah.
just be replaced. Um, but yeah, I think he met his wife. Yeah, and then they got married, and then he went off to war.
Yeah.
And
After the
then
Korean War,
and then that was
where all the Asians are speaking different Asian languages.
different languages. Actually, no. Yeah, I don't think I noticed that.
At least that's what the trivia popped up when I was watching. It says this person was speaking Cantonese, the puppeteer was speaking Tagalog, and then someone else was speaking Mandarin. And I was
Oh,
like, oh,
interesting. Okay. I don't see. Oh man, I don't see those trivia facts anymore. Like, I don't know.
I just pause the film sometimes just to see if whatever comes up. And
Oh, it doesn't pop up like while you're watching. You have to pause it.
no, it doesn't pop up when you're watching. It
I
pops
see.
up. You have to pause it, and so I see it sometimes when I pause, just like say, oh, who's the actors and actresses, and then just yeah, you can see general trivia as well. Another
Okay.
feature on IMDb TV.
How do you
Um,
how does a bit of an aside for those who are not watching since no one else is on the stream, but um, how do you know when the trivia's pop up?
I don't know. I just pause it sometimes just to see what comes up.
Okay.
Sometimes things come up, sometimes things don't. So
Okay.
I just pause it. And I think you're not even pause. Like sometimes you just move your screen and it'll pop up. So you don't even have to pause it. Just like move your screen and the different UI will pop up. But yeah, that's what I do sometimes, and you'll see it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Um,
Cool.
but yeah, I think that kind of that scene when he's talking about when he's in the Korean War, it's just all these Asians together. And that's his perspective, right? It's like
Yeah.
languages that he can understand
Yeah.
until you have the two Siamese twins who are conjoined at first, right? But I think
Well,
again that makes the
Did
story
they get
exciting.
separated? Is that like is it so I don't know if they were actually like Siamese
No,
to begin with, but like or
Yeah.
that's how he
That's how I think he's.
I think that's
Yeah,
how
I think that's how he wanted to tell it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Exactly. To make it, this, these Siamese twins that he met who are singers, singing perfect English in the Korean War. And he, hatches a plan with them, but then when we see them at the end of the movie, they're actually not together. They're not conjoined, right? They're actually separate,
Right.
Sisters and whatnot. But I think you should get that's part of his fantastical telling, right? He just says, "Oh, look, this is what happened," and he met someone who is kind of out there, but in real life, they're just kind of normal.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean that's I guess part of the exaggeration, or like they are real. So his the stories are based on fact, truth,
Right.
but they're just built with a little bit of spice and flavor.
A little bit, a lot. Sometimes it's a I think really flourish. And then there's also the time, again another time I think where he becomes a bank robber for a little bit. I wonder what
Oh
that
yeah,
kind of that whole story, right? He doesn't
I
face
love how
repercussions.
this.
He finds the poet,
Yeah.
and the poet becomes a Wall Street banker, which you kind of see with his clothes, like how he's a little bit more successful now. But yeah, just at that time, it's like, oh, did he become like a robber? Like that's kind of again part of it or his exciting life. He becomes a robber just unwillingly.
Yeah.
Like I think he makes that kind of a he's not a bad guy. He doesn't want to rob it, like but he's just kind of, oh yeah, I was I'm willing drafted to help the poet to rob this bank.
Right.
And then when there's no money, kind of I think maybe it's there was some kind of a financial downturn. I don't know. That's why there's no money in the bank, and he tells the poet like you got to go do a different job change. And, yeah. So I don't know if that's either maybe he dabbled in crime, or if the poet came back to him and asked for help, and the father or Edward Bloom kind of gave him advice on what to do to do a career change, which you kind of see, right? The Wall Street banker was grateful and sent him $10,000 afterwards after he became big on Wall Street. So
yeah, I agree. Like part of me is like wondering like what like that aspect of the movie, like when he was telling the story of the poet becoming the bank robber and him like just on the whim just being his accomplice, just like agreeing to what he's saying, like go get the ball and get the money, and like I wonder how much of truth there was, like how much that was exaggerated, or whether or not it was more so just like, I don't know, he just came in, stole money, and then the guy was like, hey, like on his way I was like, hey, you should become a Wall Street dude or something.
Yeah.
Like, maybe they caught up later. I don't know. Yeah, I don't like. And to me, it's like it just felt so almost scripted in the sense that it's like, yeah, like he came in, robbed the bank at this time, was an accomplice, and then like near the end was like, you know what, you should like the whole being part of the plan on the whim. That part is just like, I feel like the most scripted, like to me, like almost like a story. Which it is. It is a story, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, it was very like fitting, because to me.
But it's funny also, like during that story, like during the drive, he goes really into detail about like the oil.
Oh yeah, the finances, right? And he just goes. Yeah, I just like.
Yeah, and just like
there's too much detail. It doesn't matter.
But there actually might be some truth to that. Like that's actually something maybe he's an expert on or something, or he knows about, and just that's why he tells that in the story. He's able to talk a lot about it, and this is the changes the mind, or maybe it's just all fantastical. He's making it up. He's like, oh, maybe I know about it, and just told the Wall Street the poet, and that's why the poet changes his life.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly. With these stories, you don't know what's truth and what's fake, and you kind of when you see it, then you kind of realize like what was this true meaning, what was the true story behind it, and it could have been really boring. Maybe there was no bank robbery at all, and it was just like a way that. Show how the poet came to him at a desperate time, and Edward Bloom was, being the nice guy that he is, help him get off his feet, gave him maybe gave him a loan, and maybe helped him try to, do something that, different in his life to change his career. But in order to, but that might be boring, right? So instead of, him, coming him for help, he's like, oh, he came in as a bank robber. It came in, to steal money, and and instead of money, Edward Bloom gave him his, some of his savings, and and because of that, he was able to get off his feet, pull himself by the bootstraps, and become a Wall Street banker, and then because of this, he was able to give a $10,000 gift back to Edward Bloom.
Yep, and then he could buy his house.
Yeah, exactly. So that could have been a fantastical story of something that's just so mundane, right? Of someone who just needed help.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was an interesting part. And then I guess he becomes a traveling salesman, and goes back to help Spectre, revisits Spectre, except now like apparently it's too late, like the town is run down, or like basically like it's connected to the outside world, so now it's ruined almost.
Yeah.
Which is I guess symbolic in some sense, but it visits Jenny, who's older now. And and it's kind of interesting because this is now from Jenny's perspective, because Will, like his son, goes to visit Spectre, like real life Spectre, and visits Jenny, who's real, and then like talks to her, and then believes that his dad had gone to an affair with her, and then didn't, gets the truth, and then his son's realizing, like, wait a minute, these stories, there's truth to them. Like, maybe my dad's not full of, BS or whatever. But, yeah, that was a very, like, I think that was, like, this is the scene right before he goes back home and sees that, like, his dad went to the hospital because of a stroke.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was, right. Yeah, he comes back home and then realizes, and I think that's when he starts. Yeah, again, that's kind of like a turning point after he meets Jenny. He realizes, like, oh, yeah, as you said, there's truth to it. There's a different element to these stories of how he helped people around him and how these people kind of perceived Edward Bloom, who was a larger than life character.
Yeah.
And then but yeah. But the ending scene, I think, really got to me. Like, it was really, I think, emotional, but, like, at the same time, it's like, I think it's just because of the whole death defying, not defying, but facing death, and how the son tries to meet the expectations of his father's story, right? He doesn't know how to start the story, but then he realizes his father wants to go out in a big way, or have a final tale to make it exciting, and that's how Edward, his son kind of crafts this whole tale that they escape, as we discussed earlier during our discussion. But it's interesting that his son kind of understands that, and emulates just this kind of flourish and flair to the whole thing. But
yeah,
the whole ending scene really kind of got to me, like, oh, it kind of raised my perception of the film. I think kind of how at least how it tied up. Yeah. I really liked how it ended. In terms of it kind of had this fantastical element, but also kind of like was a good summary of the father's life and how his son finally understands and wants to give his father an ending that the father will be satisfied with, because the father asks his son now to tell the story of how he goes. And then you kind of realize, like, oh, the father didn't know how he would go, but at that point he kind of knows, and he wants his son to tell it. And the son's like, I don't know how it ends, but it's like, no, please tell it. Like, how does it start?
Right.
It was interesting. I think to be able to do that. I think I think there would be. I'd like to have it more connection between the son and the father throughout the film, because I feel like the most of the film is about the father's life, but that ending really really got to me in terms of, like, how it was executed.
Yep, I agree. I do like the ending a lot. I think the ending was, like, probably one of the best parts of the film in terms of the execution.
Yeah.
It definitely didn't feel too sappy. Like, it didn't feel like it was forcing this, almost like this reconciliation. It felt very not generic. It felt very genuine and heartfelt. And, like, I think it made a lot of sense considering how the rest of the story was being told, because basically it was like the father's telling this whole story to various people, and even, like, people that he's like, piece by piece, the son Will is, like, almost like understanding his father more as we are understanding his father more through his stories.
Yeah.
So, for him to, like, finish his dad's tale, as, like, basically his dad's dying wish is very fitting. And basically symbolic of, like, the reconciliation, the whole, like, his son now understands why. And his son continues his stories to his children.
Yeah.
So.
And he kind of makes the point of how, because of the way that his father tells his stories, and because of the way how they're exciting, interesting, and people like to recall them, right? Mm-hmm. It's a way that his father becomes immortal, right? Because these stories live on, and the stories of his father live on, and they can be told over and over again because they're interesting, exciting, and weird, but people are willing to listen because they're funny and interesting and exciting. So it's a way for his father's memory to live on, even after he's passed. So I think that was a good kind of tale, but I think maybe they should have harkened back to some of those elements and themes in earlier. But at the end, it makes sense, right? Like, his father lives on, through him, through this, and he's not able to forget his father, who's just boring, right? His father didn't live a boring, or didn't seem to live a boring, regular, or mundane life, which it might have been, except for the Korean War. But now they know him as this fantastical dude who's done a lot and has lived through all these tales and legends.
Yeah. So, yep. Ends with a big fish. I think almost like begins with a fish too.
Yeah.
He catches the fish, and the fish is like, "Here's your wedding ring."
Yeah.
And then at the end, he transforms into a big catfish. Yep. And immortalizes him almost. He's a big fish in a big pond.
Yeah. He's
Yep.
able to fit in the world he was meant to be.
Yep. Yep. Well, with that note, how would you rate the film?
Oh, how would I rate the film? Complicated, I would say. I think for the most of the film, I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't really understand what was going on, and it's just like it wasn't really clicking for me. But I think the ending really kind of elevated the film. Like the way it was going, I was just thinking like, oh, did I enjoy it? Did I not enjoy it? I don't know. I would have to say, oh, somewhere between 7 and 7.5. I would say
Okay.
um. I really like the ending. Like it really tight. Like the ending gave a really good impression for me. But the rest of the movie itself, I felt was kind of just strange and was kind of loosely stitched together. I mean, it kind of told the story of his life, but at the same time, I feel like it should have gone more into a relationship between the son and father, maybe the consequences of the father's actions.
Yeah.
For the son, because right at the beginning, I wonder like why did the son kind of detest and hate? It didn't make sense to me. Maybe that's I just didn't understand with the son because maybe I was looking outside of how I would view it as an audience of Edward Bloom. Like, oh, this guy's funny and charismatic and whatnot. It's like but he's telling these stories. I don't think he's hurting anybody, but his son kind of just like detested him for that. So I think going into that relationship more, whatever, made me understand. And then maybe some of these fantastical elements were like really really weird, and maybe seeing hints throughout of like like the truth or like elements of how they affected Edward Bloom's father's life in in the past. Maybe seeing some mementos or whatnot. I'm not too sure. But if kind of connected these stories together a little bit more, or kind of grounded them to reality to see like either how his real life would have been or how it couldn't have been. So it was just a weird movie for me. Like at least in the beginning until it kind of tied itself together near the end.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe my final rating for this would be, I would say 7.5. Like it's just not a bad movie. It's shot beautifully too, right? Like it's very cinematic, like the way that it's portrayed. I think that helped a lot, right? It's something that's visually pleasing.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the scenes are really really nice, and how they framed everything. Like the car, or like how they framed especially the Camaro or whatever car they had. Some of the shots with that, shots with the Edward Bloom and his wife in the bathtub. How it's like seeing that kind of intimate scene,
Yep.
right? The shot of like when Edward Bloom is in the hospital bed, you just see him like in the front and center, and with the son kind of off to the side. You just kind of say like this is his life now, or coming to the end of his life. And just again, the ending, just whole when he's like going through like the whole crowd of people in his life, and being able to get to his final resting place during that final story. I just love that the whole shot and scene. It's really nostalgic for Edward Bloom. But a lot of things the very beginning did not work for me. It's not until the end where it kind of tied together. I kind of made all the reconnections, but just throughout the experience of the film itself, I thought there could have been a lot improved in terms of like portraying who these characters, at least the original characters, not just the fantastical elements of it. But I would say maybe 7.5. I would put.
Yeah, I kind of you did bring up a good point about like the original conflict between the father and son about like and how believable it was, because you mentioned that it's like almost like in a sense like we not believable because like you don't understand like why it's happening in the first place. Like we never really got a sense of like why that conflict arose, other than the fact that the son, like during the party, during his one of the parties for his son, the dad was telling a story, and the son was like, "You keep on telling these stories that aren't true," and like, you know, something's, yeah, like they're just like lies, and dad's like, "Son, you gotta understand," and the son's like, "No, I don't understand. I'm not gonna talk to you anymore." So like, yeah, in a sense, it's not, there's not a lot of like build up for that. It just kind of like, you know, as an audience, you kind of like have to believe that there is tension,
Yeah.
and as the film progresses, the tension is sort of like, you kind of also understand where the original conflict comes in as as they're reconnecting.
Yeah. Yeah.
But um, yeah, but for me, I think the so at first I would give this movie an 8. One, because I really enjoy like family relationship movies where like they come together. Like to me, that's just something that like I'm by. Like that's
Yeah.
sort of something
I
like,
knew you would like this movie. I thought it was like, oh, this is something that kind of goes up your alley.
yeah, like I really like those like sort of like relationships buildings between family members where that's not over the top and not over exaggerated. Like that those connections aren't like sappy, and it's not like they're genuine, but they don't have to be like, they're subtle yet genuine. And I think that
Mhm.
this film, the stories are themselves are exaggerated, but the relationship between the father and son and the reconnection, that felt very genuine, um, especially in the ending. The ending, I think, is what really made this film for me. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, if there's anything I took away from this film, it was really the ending, and how it like basically brought together everything that was told throughout the story. Like it was a very good conclusion.
Exactly.
Um, Probably one of like the better conclusions I've seen from the films that we've watched recently. Like in terms of like comparatively with the rest of the film.
Yeah.
Um,
I agree. It definitely was a standout scene, right? It
it was a
really
standout scene. Yep,
was one of the more memorable endings that I think I would have, yeah, all the movies we watched, it definitely was like something that, you know, was, I think, really well done.
I agree. I agree. Um, yep, I did definitely feel a little bit of emotion in the end when
Yeah.
as the father was dying in the end, and the son was finishing his story. Like that was a very like heartfelt moment. Um, and there, and, you know, to be fair, it's not a lot. It's not like those moments when there's when like the moments for me at least. The reason why I felt so like emotional is not like, it's not a lot of like back and forth like, oh dad, I'm sorry, like, you know, like I should have believed you in these stories. It's not a lot of like direct conversation about like the conflict itself. It's very much so like, it's very much so like showing but not telling in a sense.
Yes.
Um, and that sort of process really elevates like the um, resolution, I think, between their relationship and the reconciliation overall on that journey it took throughout the story or throughout the film. Um, because they don't, yeah, they basically just never had to like tell us like, oh, like the dad is this, like dad's sorry, the son's sorry, the dad is like understanding, or the son now understands. They didn't have to like have that conversation at the very end. Like they
That's true.
basically like showed us through his son's way of finishing his dad's story that like it's this is like the son understands. Dad and son
Yeah.
are reconnected. They're good. This is like a full circle ending, almost. And his dad's legacy will continue.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I think it's a beautiful ending. I think it's one that like
Definitely, yeah, it worked well. Yeah, as you said, it definitely they did it well in terms
yeah.
of like how they executed it, and how it portrayed the final emotions and themes
Mm-hmm.
without just having, as you said, like, oh yeah, I forgive you. They're
Yeah,
not need to be that
they didn't
scene.
have that like, they didn't have they didn't need that conversation. Like if it was just that conversation at the end, there was no like story. The ending would have just been like, it was, for me it would have been so flat, and it would have been like a much lower rating on my part. Because for me at least, I like, for me there were parts of the film I was like especially in the first half where I was like, oh man, there's so much of this like fantasy element. Like maybe it's because I'm not really quite used to like this style of directing that Tim Burton does, but like
Mhm.
for me it was very much like I had to like really get in, like it took me a while to get into it and to become invested. And the payoff, the ending being the payoff, did it did help. It was a good payoff, but
Yeah.
it did take me a while to like get used to like what was going on. Like it
Yeah.
was to me, it was like there's so much weird like oddities, and I'm just like I don't really know how to process all of this.
Exactly.
And to
That's what
me,
bothered me too. Yeah.
so like yeah, and like I wish, and I also you made up a good point. Like I kind of wish that there was a little bit more focus on present day characters and their like role, because it was mostly the movie was mostly just a story about the father, like Edward Bloom,
Yeah.
and sort of like told through his present day, while as he's dying,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think what really made this film was the ending. Like I said, it's just, um, I think the ending was almost perfect for like how the story was told throughout the previous. Like if like it's like if I had to change the film, then the ending would also have to have to change too. Like with it, like it can't just be like. It's like both of them go hand in hand, very much so.
Really, I think the ending could just stay the same, but there's just points within the movie I would have like added or changed and edited, or yeah, just added more characterization between the relationship, and I think that would have really hit the ending even harder. I mean, the ending still hit
Yeah.
out of the park, right? But I think it could have been even done more if the again certain elements of the film, I think as I said, improved upon the relationship, the present day, or give more context to the fantastical stories that we saw.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah. Well, well said. Um, like I said, the film isn't really we're for those of you who are in chat. There's one more viewer in chat now, where my friend and I we're finishing up our discussion of the film, because we basically gave it our ratings. My friend Austin gave it a 7.5. I gave it an 8. I'm a little bit more biased because I really like these films where they kind of explore relationships between family members. That's always something that's something that I personally really like. But yeah, in terms of like, would we recommend this film? I would recommend this film. Overall, well, I gave it an 8, so I would definitely recommend it. But like,
yeah,
if you like sort of like this like whimsical flair of directing, of this sort of exaggeration of sorts, these oddities of like, what's the word, like just like Tim Burton has from my impression of Tim Burton, like another director who I think when I was watching Tim Burton, like another director I was reminded of was like Wes Anderson. Sort of like this
yeah,
like kind of like it's not grounded. Like it's very whimsical. Like I think whimsical is like the word that I would just use to describe their way of telling a story through film. And yeah, there's a lot of like oddities. And some of those oddities can be really pleasant, for some people. But for me, I kind of had to get like used to it because I'm not like quite used to this way of storytelling. But it's not bad. It's definitely really cool in this way. It's very unique. And if you like those like whimsical oddities sort of vibe, then I would recommend this film. It's very good. If you like relationship building, like if you and your family members, if you ever had a falling out with a family member, reconciliation, or just like appreciate family in general, I think you would like this film. If you like Tim Burton, I think you would like this film too. Like if you liked any of his films, I mean Nightmare Before Christmas, or like other things that he's directed, I think you would like this film too. Not that I would know, but I just think that like it kind of fits in that sort of genre. In fact, I think maybe this film might be even more grounded than some of his other ones. I don't really know because this one did have a lot of like real life stuff to it. So yeah. Apparently, Tim Burton himself actually really he dedicated this film more so to, in a sense, to his like parents, because I think at the time when this film was released or in production, his mom died, and so he kind of like used that her death to like really inspire this film in general. So, yeah, I would recommend it for those various reasons. Austin, do you have anything else you want to say? Any last comments?
No, I do not. You well said. I would also recommend it. It could be confusing at first, but I think as we said, ending
Give it
ties
some
it
time.
together and
Give it
just
some time.
good. Yeah, give it some time. Exactly. Give it some time, and
Yeah,
you'll I think be able to appreciate the movie
it'll
as it is.
it'll pay off. It pays off. In the
Yeah,
end, I mean, like maybe it takes too long to pay off. It's 2 hours, I think.
it
Around.
is. It does. Yeah.
So if you you know if you need 2 hours for this film for it to pay off, but if you have that time, but I think it does, and I think Austin also just agrees with me. So yep, that's it for today. Next week we'll be watching another film. We don't know. Sorry, I don't have like
Yep.
maybe I should run a schedule. Um, but yeah, we'll be right now we've been doing this weekly. It's episode 3. Next week will be episode 4. So tune in. I only have one view right now, so it doesn't really matter. But for those of you who view this afterward, tune in next week. There's another film we'll be watching. Yeah. Anyway, I hope that's it from us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, or the week, or whatever day that you're watching this on. And yeah, have a good one.
Bye.
See ya.